Footsteps in the underground. If you've ever been to Montreal, you probably know about the underground city. It's not really a city, more like a massive network of tunnels that connect shopping malls, office towers, train stations. Basically, the whole downtown area is stitched together under the streets. In winter, when the snow piles up and the wind cuts through your coat, you can spend hours down there without ever stepping outside. For locals, it's normal. For outsiders, it feels kind of unreal, like a maze that never ends. That's where this story takes place. A friend of mine, let's call him Eric, was a university student in Montreal at the time. He had a late class one evening, and after grabbing some food with friends, he decided to cut through the underground to get to the metro. He knew the route. Everyone who spends more than a month in the city learns at least one shortcut through the tunnels. But this was later than usual, close to when most of the shops had already closed. The bright storefront lights were gone, and the hallways were lit only by those overhead fluorescent tubes that buzz and flicker in a way that makes the space feel colder than it already is. At first, it was just quiet. Too quiet. If you've been there during the day, you know it's usually packed. Shoppers, commuters, tourists, people dragging suitcases. But at night, when the stores pull down their gates, the whole place changes. It's still the same tiled floor, the same glass walls, the same signs pointing to exits, but stripped of people. It feels unnatural, like a stage after the actors have left. Eric walked alone, his footsteps echoing in a way they never had when the tunnels were busy. He didn't think much of it until he noticed another sound. Footsteps. Not his. These ones were heavier, sharper. The sound of leather soles, like dress shoes, striking the tile in a steady rhythm. He told me the first thing he did was check his reflection in one of the darkened shop windows. You can usually catch someone trailing you that way. But all he saw was his own silhouette, stretched thin by the fluorescent light. The footsteps didn't stop, though. They kept pace with him, just far enough behind that he couldn't see the source when he glanced over his shoulder. Now, here's the thing about those tunnels. There are plenty of corners, turns, and intersections. You can change direction quickly, thinking you'll lose whoever's back there. Eric tried that. He cut down one hallway, then another, quickened his pace, even doubled back once. But the sound always returned. Measured, steady, as though whoever it was had no trouble following. At one point, he stopped completely. He figured maybe he'd hear the other person pass by. Maybe confirm it was just another student or some worker heading home. Instead, the footsteps stopped too. Silence filled the corridor. Just him, the hum of the lights, and the stale underground air. That silence lasted long enough for him to feel his heartbeat in his throat. He started walking again, faster this time, and so did the sound behind him. Click, click, click. Each step landed with perfect timing, like the rhythm of a metronome. Whoever it was didn't hurry, didn't stumble, didn't sound out of breath. Just constant, patient footsteps. Eric finally turned around, ready to confront whoever was messing with him. And that's when he saw him. At the end of the corridor, under one of those dull ceiling lights, stood a tall man in a long overcoat. Nothing unusual about that in Montreal. Winters are brutal, coats are necessary. But what struck Eric wasn't the coat. It was the man's face, or rather the lack of it. The light fell across him, bright enough that Eric should have seen details. Eyes, nose, something. Instead, it was shadow. Not the kind that moves or shifts when you blink. This shadow clung to him as if his features were erased, replaced by darkness itself. Eric froze. The man didn't move closer. He just stood there, still as a statue, the long hem of his coat brushing against the tiles. For a few seconds, Eric thought maybe it was just a trick of the light. Maybe his mind was exaggerating. He rubbed his eyes, looked again. Nothing changed. The man's face was still swallowed in that unnatural dark. What made Eric bolt wasn't what he saw. It was what he heard. The footsteps started again, but the man wasn't moving. He stayed rooted in place, coat hanging, shadow where his face should have been. Yet the sound of leather soles on tile came closer, steady and unbroken, echoing as though someone invisible was now walking toward him. Eric didn't wait around. He turned and sprinted down the corridor, his own sneakers slapping against the tiles, his breath echoing in his ears. He ran until he saw the glowing sign for the metro entrance. The moment he pushed through the turnstile and into the station, the sound was gone. Just the usual background noise, trains, announcements, people, nothing else. He swore he never went into the tunnels that late again. If you're not familiar with Montreal, you might think the underground city is just a nickname. It's not. It's real. Miles of tunnels stretch under downtown, and during the day, it feels practical, even comforting in winter. But at night, when you're alone down there, it's a different world. A place built for crowds, stripped of them, where every sound you hear might not be your own. Some say the man in the coat has been seen before. No one agrees on who he is or what he wants, but the story always ends the same way. Steady footsteps, a figure without a face, and the reminder that even in a city full of people, there are places where you are never truly alone. The frozen lake. If you've never been up north, really north, past the cities and into the Yukon, you might not understand what the word winter really means. It's not just cold. It's the kind of cold that grabs your bones and refuses to let go. The kind of silence where even your own breath feels too loud. Out there, the sky stretches wider than you thought possible, and the land is endless snow, pine trees and lakes that freeze so solid you could drive a truck across them. That's the setting for this story. A guy I knew, let's call him Mason, was an explorer type. Not a professional guide or anything, but one of those people who loved the idea of going out where no one else was. He worked odd jobs, saved just enough, and then would vanish into the wild for weeks. Most of us would be huddled around a fireplace in January. Mason would be strapping on his boots and heading into the Yukon wilderness. He told me about this one trip, a winter trek across a frozen lake. If you're not familiar, the Yukon has hundreds of them. Long, flat expanses of ice surrounded by mountains. In the daytime, they look almost beautiful, like a mirror laid across the earth. At night, though, they're different. You feel exposed. The surface stretches so far that you start to lose your sense of distance. And underneath, there's black water deep enough to swallow a town. Mason was walking across one of these lakes after sunset. He had his headlamp, a pack, and heavy boots. The kind of gear you need just to stay alive out there. The air was so cold that when he exhaled, his breath froze into crystals before it drifted away. Every step echoed with this hollow, cracking sound. Normal, but nerve-wracking when you know you're walking on a sheet of ice. At first, it was just the sound of his own boots. Crunch, crunch, crunch. But then he heard something else. Knock. He froze. It was faint, but clear. A sharp knock from beneath the ice, like someone rapping their knuckles against a table, only muffled. He thought maybe he imagined it. The lake makes noises. It groans and shifts as the ice expands and contracts. Anyone who's been up north knows that. But then it came again. Knock. Knock. This time he stopped moving entirely. He crouched down, ear close to the ice, and listened. That's when he swore he heard it. Words. A voice. Not loud, but unmistakable. Help me. The sound rose from below his feet, faint and desperate, like someone trapped under the frozen sheet trying to be heard. Mason's first instinct was to back up, but curiosity got the better of him. He swung his headlamp beam down at the ice. The light cut across the surface, catching on cracks and frozen bubbles. At first, it was just that, normal ice formations. Then he saw it. Hands, pressed flat against the underside of the ice. Pale, splayed fingers spread wide, as if clawing upward. Not one set, not two, dozens. The beam of his headlamp revealed hand after hand, pushing against the barrier, sliding across the surface, smearing the frost from underneath. Some looked small, like children's hands. Others were larger, long-fingered. All of them moved. All of them pressed harder when the light touched them. Mason swore he staggered back, almost falling. His breath came out ragged, fogging his vision. The voice rose again, this time louder, layered, as if more than one throat was speaking through the ice. "Help me! Help us!" He turned and ran. Boots slamming against the frozen surface, pack bouncing against his shoulders. The sound of his steps mixed with the pounding in his chest. The knocking didn't stop. It followed, echoing beneath him, chasing him across the lake like a drumbeat. When he finally looked down, that's when it got worse. His footprints stretched out behind him, crisp marks pressed into the thin layer of snow across the ice. But right beside them, so close he could have reached out and touched them, were other prints. Wet, bare, human feet, toes and all. Each one glistening like they had just risen out of water, tracking alongside his boots. Mason swore no one was there. He never saw anyone, never felt a hand grab him, never heard the crunch of another body moving across the lake. Just those wet prints, perfectly matched to his path, as though someone unseen had been walking with him step for step. He didn't stop running until he hit the tree line at the far end of the lake. Even then, he didn't dare look back. He camped in the forest that night, fire roaring, knife close by. He said he didn't sleep. Not a second. Every time the wind moved through the trees, he swore he heard faint knocking, like it had followed him off the ice. Now, some people would call it hallucination. Being alone in sub-zero temperatures, exhausted, miles from anyone, can make your brain play tricks. The body under stress imagines things. That's the logical explanation, but Mason didn't buy that. He wasn't the type to spook easy. He'd been through storms, seen wolves up close, crossed rivers half frozen and half flooded. He knew the difference between fear and imagination. What scared him was how real it all felt. The cold touch of the ice, when he leaned down to listen. The distinct sound of words spoken through water. The shape of those wet footprints, right beside his own. And here's the part that stuck with me. Weeks later, after he came back from the Yukon, he told the story to a local in a bar. Just some old-timer who'd lived up there all his life. Mason said he expected the guy to laugh, call him crazy, but instead, the man just stared into his glass and said, "You're lucky you ran." Mason asked what he meant. The old man shrugged, finally looking up. Not everyone does. He wouldn't say more. I don't know what Mason saw, or thought he saw, out there on that frozen lake. But if you ever find yourself in the Yukon, standing on ice so thick it feels like concrete, and you hear knocking from below, don't lean down, don't shine your light, and whatever you do, don't follow the footprints. The Mineshaft. Northern Ontario doesn't get much attention unless you're from there. People talk about Toronto, Ottawa, maybe the cottage country around Muskoka. But once you push past that, the land changes. Dense forests, endless lakes, small towns that seem half abandoned even when people still live in them. And scattered through those woods and hills are the remains of old mines. Some of those mines shut down decades ago when the ore dried up. Others were abandoned suddenly. The entrance is sealed, but not forgotten. Everyone in the area grows up with stories about them. Kids daring each other to sneak inside. Older folks warning about bad air, sudden cave-ins, or just things you don't want to stir up. That's the setting for this story. A group of college kids decided to take a trip north. They weren't from Ontario. Most of them were from the city, used to sidewalks and skyscrapers, not pines and granite. One of them had heard about an abandoned mine near a small town. The entrance wasn't officially blocked, just fenced off half-heartedly. A "do not enter" sign hung crooked, more rust than paint left on it. Naturally, they decided that made it the perfect adventure. They parked their beat-up car off the road and hiked through underbrush until they found the entrance. The tunnel mouth was just a dark slash in the rock, framed by rotting timbers. Inside, the air was colder than outside, thick with a smell of damp earth and rusted metal. They had flashlights, cheap ones that flickered when you shook them, but the beam cut far enough to show the path descending deeper. They joked around at first, laughing, filming everything on their phones. Echoes bounced off the stone walls, making their voices sound louder, stranger. But the deeper they went, the quieter they got. The walls dripped with water, their shoes crunched on gravel, and in places, old wooden supports groaned like something alive. Then they saw it. At the far end of the tunnel, light flickered. Not the harsh white of their flashlights, but a soft, yellow glow. It swayed like a flame carried in someone's hand. Then another appeared, and another. Lanterns. They could make out a line of men moving slowly deeper into the mine. Each one carried an old-fashioned lamp, the kind with glass globes and iron frames. Their outlines were bulky, shoulders stooped, arms heavy. Miners. The kids stopped, exchanging nervous laughs. Maybe it was some kind of local tourist event, a reenactment for visitors. Maybe they'd stumbled onto a history program, something organized by the town to bring in a little money. That seemed reasonable enough, except there hadn't been any signs. No flyers, no mention online, nothing. Still, curiosity won. They crept closer, trying not to startle the group. The lamps swung gently, shadows stretching across the rough walls. The line of miners moved slowly, boots striking stone with a steady rhythm. None of them spoke. None turned around. Just step after step, deeper into the tunnel. And then they reached the end. The mine stopped in a flat wall of rock. No passage beyond, no side tunnel. Just solid stone. The kids expected the men to turn, to reveal themselves. Instead, the lantern light grew dim, swallowed one by one, as the line of miners walked straight into the wall. Not through a door, not down a hidden path, into the stone itself. Their bodies faded, as if the rock had opened to receive them, then sealed tight again. Silence returned. Only the kids' breathing filled the tunnel. Then they noticed the wall. At first, it was bare rock. Then, as their flashlights swept across it, shapes began to emerge. Handprints. Dozens of them, pressed into the stone as though the rock had once been soft. Some prints looked fresh, edges sharp, as if they'd been made minutes ago. Others overlapped, layered one on top of the other, a crowd of hands frozen in mid-reach. The kids didn't scream. Not yet. They just turned and bolted, flashlights shaking wildly in their hands as they retraced their steps. By the time they burst back into the night air, lungs burning, none of them wanted to speak about what they'd seen. But the story didn't end there. That night, back at the cheap motel where they were staying, one of them, let's call him Tyler, fell asleep almost instantly. He was exhausted from the hike and the shock of the mine. His friend said he started muttering in his sleep. At first, they laughed, thinking it was just nonsense. But the words became clearer. Short phrases, over and over. Swing. 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 They watched as his hands moved in his sleep, slow and heavy, like he was gripping something. He lifted his arms and brought them down again, the motion jerky, mechanical, like he was holding a pickaxe. Hours passed. He never stopped. The sound of his palms smacking against the thin motel blanket echoed like metal striking stone. His breathing grew rough, in rhythm with each downward swing. When they shook him awake in the morning, he looked drained. His eyes were bloodshot, skin pale. He said he dreamed all night of being deep underground, swinging a pickaxe into stone that never broke, surrounded by other men doing the same. Their faces were blank, lit only by lantern light, and the sound of their tools rang endlessly, with no escape. He swore he could still feel the weight of the handle in his palms. The group left the town that morning, too shaken to keep exploring. They barely spoke on the drive back. And though they tried to laugh it off later, just a weird experience, maybe a trick of light and imagination, none of them could shake the feeling that something followed them out of that mine. Because when Tyler checked his phone the next day, he found a video he didn't remember recording. It was short, only a few seconds, filmed in total darkness. No voices, no faces. Just the steady sound of metal on stone, echoing endlessly, as though the work below the earth had never stopped, and maybe never will. The bus stop. Vancouver isn't the kind of city most people picture when they think about Canada. People imagine Toronto with its skyscrapers or Montreal with its French charm. But Vancouver has its own mood, especially at night. You've got the ocean pressing in on one side, mountains looming on the other, and when the fog rolls in, it feels like the city is swallowed whole. You can walk down a street you know by heart and barely see 5 feet ahead. Streetlights glow like faint orbs, and the world gets quiet, almost too quiet. That's where this story takes place. There was this kid, a student, maybe early 20s. He had been out late, nothing wild, just hanging with friends and missing the earlier buses. If you know Vancouver, you know the bus system runs late, but when it's after midnight, things get thinner. You can wait a long time if you're unlucky. That night, the fog was so thick, it made everything feel strange. He said he couldn't even see the next intersection. Just his little patch of sidewalk, the glowing bus shelter, and the dim blur of car headlights sliding past now and then. He checked his phone, saw he had a few more minutes to wait. The app still showed the bus was scheduled, so he shoved his hands into his pockets and leaned against the glass. Then he noticed her. At first, just a figure in the mist, a woman walking up to the bus stop. Nothing unusual. People take the bus all the time. But as she stepped into the light, he realized something was off. She was wearing a uniform. Not like a cop or anything. More like a transit worker's uniform. Only it wasn't the kind he'd ever seen. The jacket was too old-fashioned, the hat a style nobody wore anymore. It looked like something out of a black and white photo, not a modern city. She smiled politely, the way strangers sometimes do when they end up waiting together. Her voice was calm, almost kind when she spoke. "You shouldn't wait here. The next bus isn't coming." He blinked. It took him a second to process. "What do you mean?" "The schedule says it'll be here soon." The woman just shook her head, still smiling. "That line doesn't run anymore. Hasn't for years." Then, without another word, she turned and walked back into the fog. Her steps made no sound on the pavement. Within seconds, she was gone, swallowed by the mist as though she had never been there. The kid stood there, confused. Maybe she was messing with him. Maybe she was drunk, or maybe it was some local prank. But something about her manner, too calm, too certain, made his skin prickle. He pulled out his phone again, opened the transit app. The bus route still showed up, still claimed it was coming. He frowned, looked around, but the street was empty. Just silence, fog, and the faint buzz of the overhead light. Then he noticed the route map posted on the side of the shelter. The kind of laminated board that shows all the lines, the stops, and the transfer points. His eyes scanned down to the line he was waiting for. And there, printed clearly, was a note in small text. This route was discontinued in 2003, 20 years ago. He stepped back, feeling his stomach drop. He knew he wasn't imagining it. He snapped a photo with his phone just to be sure, hands trembling. The note looked too official to be graffiti. Not scratched in, not a sticker, just part of the actual display. He didn't wait around after that. He started walking, half running, through the fog until he reached a busier street. Eventually he caught another line, one that definitely still existed, and rode it home, refusing to look too closely at the other passengers for fear of what he might see. Later, when he told friends about it, they laughed. They said maybe the transit authority forgot to update the app. Maybe he'd been tired, half asleep, imagining things. But when he showed them the photo of the route map, the laughter stopped. The text about the discontinued line was right there. No one could explain why his app still showed it, or why a stranger in an outdated uniform would tell him to leave. The part that stuck with him most wasn't the uniform, though. It was the smile. The way she looked at him when she said those words. "The next bus isn't coming." Not cruel, not mocking, just matter of fact. As if she'd been saying the same line for years, repeating it to anyone foolish enough to wait in the fog for a bus that no longer existed, and maybe never will again. The lantern. Quebec is a strange place for camping if you're not used to it. Most people think of the province for Quebec City with its cobblestone streets, or Montreal with its festivals and food. But head north, away from the cities, and it's all endless forest. Thick pine woods that stretch farther than you can walk, lakes that feel untouched, and nights so dark you forget the sky has stars until the fire dies down. That's the setting for this story. A family went camping one summer. Parents and their 2 kids. They weren't hardcore outdoorsy types. More the kind of family that borrowed gear, bought a cheap tent, and thought getting away from the city meant driving 2 hours into the woods. But the forest up there doesn't care who you are. When the sun sets, you're just one more set of humans under its watch. They set up camp by a clearing, pitched their tent, cooked hot dogs over a fire. The kids loved it, running around, chasing each other with flashlights, trying to scare their mom. For a while it was perfect. Then came night. The woods are different once the fire burns low. Sounds get sharper. The crack of branches, the call of owls, the whisper of wind through trees. The family huddled close, telling stories, trying not to notice the vast blackness, pressing in from every side. That's when they saw it. A light. At first, it was just a faint glow deeper in the trees. Not a flashlight beam, not headlights from some distant road. This was softer, golden. The kind of light a lantern gives off. The kids noticed it first. One of them, the younger boy, pointed and shouted, "Look! Someone's out there!" Sure enough, the glow swayed gently, as if carried by a hand. It flickered, dipping behind trunks, then returning, moving slowly between the trees. The boy didn't wait for permission. He ran. "Wait!" his mother shouted, but he was already sprinting toward the glow. His small flashlight bounced wildly, barely keeping him on the path. The father jumped up, stumbling after him, heart pounding. The mother called his name, voice cracking. By the time the father caught up, the glow was gone. Just black trees and silence. The boy stopped, breathing hard, eyes wide. "It was right there," he insisted. Then the voice came. Low, rough, not from any one direction, but everywhere, seeping out of the dark. "Return it." The sound froze them where they stood. The father grabbed his son's arm, pulling him back. Leaves crunched under their boots as they hurried to camp, the mother's flashlight beam jittering over roots and brush. None of them looked back. That night, none of them slept much. Every crackle of branches outside the tent felt too close. The father kept a hatchet by his side. Not that it made him feel safer. At some point, the boy whispered that he still saw the glow between the trees. No one answered him. When morning finally came, they stepped outside to a gray, misty dawn. The fire pit was cold. Their tent looked normal, except for one thing: the ground around it. Scattered in the dirt were broken pieces of glass, curved shards dirty with soot, the remnants of a lantern old-fashioned, the kind no one used anymore. Among the shards lay a pair of gloves, burnt black, fingers stiff and curled as if someone had left them too close to fire. The family didn't stay for breakfast. They packed in silence, shoving everything into the car. By mid-morning, they were back on the highway, the forest shrinking behind them in the rearview mirror. Later, when they told friends about it, the reaction was the same. Nervous laughs, theories, maybe some local campers playing tricks, maybe kids from the nearest town messing with city folks. But no one could explain the voice. No one could explain how lantern glass ended up right outside their tent, or why the gloves were burned yet left without a single scorch mark on the ground. The boy still brings it up sometimes. He insists the light wanted him to follow, that it looked welcoming, almost warm. The parents refuse to talk about it. They keep the story locked away, like if they say it out loud too many times, they'll hear that voice again, rising from the trees. Return it. And maybe next time it won't stop with broken glass.